Left of the box. Okay.
It's funny. It kind of shows like how little has happened in Canada since then because I don't think, other than World War One, like I don't think anybody in America, like anything from 1917 is forgotten here.
Hmm.
Like there's definitely something way crazier happened
Yeah.
since then.
Okay, but how about we actually get on to what I planned on the docket,
Well,
considering we've been
let me
at
say
this.
thank you because you
Mhm.
you taught me something. Thank
No,
you. I
no,
appreciate that.
no. Whenever I kind of want to actually share like Canadian stories, to my audience, there's a lot of Americans watching, so it's good for them to know, and a lot of Canadians don't know our history. I've learned to take deeper dives, like when you hear, oh, this community was upset because I remember again in, I believe it was Halifax, a hair salon posed in front of the statue of the founder with hair extensions. And the indigenous community of the area got really upset, and people were like, oh, they're just overreacting and stuff like that. And it's like, no, no, it's because the founder of Halifax actually put a bounty on the scalps of indigenous people in that area. And so that's in really poor taste, although the person who did the photo shoot there had no idea because we're not
Mm,
taught our history. I remember as a kid thinking we didn't have very interesting or complex history. It was just like, oh, we're too new of a country to have much happen. But it's like, no, we have a very horrific and interesting and, you know, all sorts of things happened in this country's history that we need to know about because it's hard to heal the wounds if we never even, you know, look
for
to see
sure.
what's damaged. Like it's,
Any country that was founded by colonial settler colonialism has a history that deserves to be
mhm.
investigated thoroughly
Oh, yeah.
because it's founded on the backs of people that were genocided basically.
Yeah.
So yeah, yes,
Yeah, because as we're about to talk about one of those settler colonial institutes here, because we look at what's happening over in Gaza right now, and it's like, well, all the same things happened in Canada over a much
for sure.
longer period type thing. But, you know, um, Canada starved Indigenous peoples, like caused intentional famines, put them on land where there was no access to actual food. They couldn't go on their hunting grounds. They needed passes in order to get off the reservations by the Indian agent. So they had to be approved to even go off of the reserves. And, then you have the residential schools, then you have the day schools, and then you have all the restrictions. And then you had the fact that Indigenous people couldn't even be represented by a lawyer when they went to court, for quite some
Jeez,
time. They weren't allowed to vote until I think the late 60s. Like, it's just,
wow.
it is, you know, it was intentional destruction. And so many people just, oh, Indigenous people are just living off the government and stuff of that sort. But it's like they have no idea what this government actually did to them. Like they have no concept because it's not properly taught. And then the racism is just allowed to run rampant in this country, which is actually somewhat worse than in the States. Because, like, I know in the States, it's something in the prison, it's 30% black men, but only 15% of the population is black, as far as I can think off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
like 13 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas in Canada, 30% of the male population in prison is Indigenous. Over 40% of the female population is Indigenous. Over half of foster children are Indigenous. And they make up between 5 to 7% of the population.
Well, there it is. That's the culmination of colonialism and racism
Mm-hmm.
over decades, right there.
Yeah. And then I've known Canadians who are usually accepting of like newcomers, immigrants, people of different backgrounds. But then as soon as you mention like an Indigenous person, then all of a sudden you see the racism come out. It's,
Interesting.
yeah. And like all of the abuse that they deal with from the police. Like the RCMP was actually made to police Indigenous peoples to actually go and kidnap their children to take them to residential schools to keep them in line. Like that was the reason why they were founded. And just to see the abuse that they go through at the hands of the police still, like there's something called Starlight Tours, which is still, it's when they would find an Indigenous person drunk on the streets or something, you know, instead of taking them to jail overnight, they would take them out in the middle of nowhere in below freezing temperatures and leave them.
Oh, jeez.
And many of them died because they didn't have a jacket or anything. And they were just left to freeze to death out in the middle of nowhere.
Terrible.
Yeah. Eugenics, still a huge problem. You know, so many Indigenous peoples being made infertile through coercion, through other means. Like it's just, it's so bad. It's so bad up here that, again, people don't realize because it's not taught. I wasn't really taught about residential schools when I was school aged, even though there were still residential schools open when I was school aged.